We're back for our third and final video of Texas County, Oklahoma. And it's been a fun couple videos prior to this, so hopefully you've been able to watch those. We've explored about 2/3 of the county, and now we're gonna try to get the eastern third of it approximately. I stayed in Guyman last night, and I'm heading south, and appropriately we are going to start in a town that's technically in Texas, and I thought that'd be appropriate for Texas County. So it's kind of a border town. We'll go down there, check it out, and then we'll continue venturing north. So we are literally standing on the Oklahoma-Texas line. Texas is over here. Oklahoma is right over here. Basically goes right through the middle of Hitchland. Hitchland was named after a guy with the last name of Hitch. And in the 1920s, they built the railroad through here, which is right, what I'm checking out. As I was standing here, looks fairly abandoned, although there's somebody over here working. There's some a little bit of activity here early in the morning. They had a post office from 1930 till 1955. And then the post office actually went up to Guyman, and that's where they would deliver the mail down through here. So pretty far away, actually. I drove there from there this morning, so pretty good drive for the mailman to come down here to Hitchland. It's a nice drive through some hills, and it's just a small community left with some old buildings and some houses. So yeah, interesting. I love the border towns that are on either a county border or a state border. I think they're pretty fascinating to check out. Couldn't find much information about Range, Oklahoma, although when I got here it's appropriately named, that's for sure. Only thing I did find, it had a post office for about 40 years, from the 1890s to the 1930s. It's very, wide open, kind of desolate around here. I went to where it is on the map, and all I found was a farm, and it said Range Valley Farm on one of the barns there, which I thought was a nice nod to the history of the area by the local owners. And but then there's a cemetery that I'm currently in, obviously, and it's a little bit, got to take a road, it's a couple miles to get here, but I can see the farms across the way. I think that were probably part of Range back in the day, and is still in where the community is. There was a creek, so there's a little bridge with a dried up creek. I'm assuming there was water there. It's probably why they started here, started the town or community. Sometimes I get questions about how do people take care of the cemeteries that are out in the middle of nowhere. And I pulled up to the Pleasant Ridge Cemetery, and there was somebody mowing it. And she stopped, and we started talking a little bit, and I asked her that question. And she's like, just a friend of the family has a mower, brought her dog out here today. She was off today and decided to come out and mow the cemetery, which definitely needed it. Some very unique headstones there. And but yeah, she was asking what I was doing, if I knew anybody had relatives here. I was like, no, I'm just out enjoy looking at, stuff like this. And she's like, I'm the same way. So she's, we had a good chat. So yeah, it's, if you ever wonder, it's just, volunteers and people that take, pride in their communities. Hardesty, Oklahoma, is a tale of two Hardesties. And I stopped here in a little picnic area, and it has a nice little sign here talking about Old Hardesty, which was located a few miles north of here. And it was a normal, kind of trade center. And it was started after a local rancher named Jack Hardesty. And then, it flourished when trailheads crossed through the area, but it ended up dying because the railroad didn't come through there. It went to Guyman, and Guyman, which is obviously the biggest city town here, is where people started to move. So then a second railroad ended up being built through this area, and it was actually a second line of, I think, the same railroad, the Rock Island Railroad, and they built it through where Hardesty currently is located, which isn't exactly where the original place was, but the locals insisted to name it Hardesty to keep that tradition going, and it grew into a town. And it started with a couple hundred people, and there's still a couple hundred people here. They have a elementary school, and a lot of old buildings too to check out. There's some old abandoned buildings, but plenty of houses, and good to see the population kind of stabilized for the last 70 years. On the sign, it talks about a cemetery being located a few miles from here. So we'll try to find that next. Hopefully it's still there, or it's still accessible. And then also at the school, I found something I've never found in another place, in another town. So Hardesty will be the first for that. You'll have to check out the Outtakes because it's kind of humorous. I made it up here to where the cemetery is, I'm pretty sure, because I think I see a headstone, at least one headstone out there. And it's high weeds, it really feels like I'm in places that people don't come very often. So maybe I'll take my drone and kind of float it over there and see if I can see what the cemetery looks like without trouncing through the high weeds. We're also near Optima Lake, and it has an interesting history. I think I see it. So I'm gonna maybe fly the drone over there and talk about it a little bit. As you can see, this road does not get much traffic down to the Optima Lake Dam anymore. It was completed in 1978 to be a reservoir here in Texas County, and was never filled to more than about 5% of capacity, and as you see, it pretty much is empty today. It coincided with the large-scale pumping of the High Plains Aquifer system in the area, and really was never became what they thought it would be. So the The lake surroundings have few amenities, and all the buildings were dismantled by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers in 2010. Adams is kind of an interesting stop. I never know what to expect when there's not much information online when you come to a community. But Adams was started as a railroad town, and it, I don't think was ever real big, but it had a reasonable sized community to have a post office in 1930. Actually, the post office is still here. Newer building, but it's good to see that they still have a post office, and I can understand why, because in this little kind of, I'd say confined area called Adams, there's a lot of houses, a combination of nice newer houses, old abandoned houses, all kinds of stuff. So it's kind of interesting. There's a few older buildings kind of on the main street as you drive through the middle of town. There's this park. I'm in a park here, and I think the school was here because they talk about the school on this little stone, and they have like a baseball field or baseball diamond, a lot of playground equipment here. So, that's showing a little nod to the history here. Not a lot of information found online. If you watch the first episode on the western kind of third of the county, I had trouble finding cemeteries, but man, they are everywhere around here. You might have saw the two before. There was a couple Mennonite cemeteries before I got here. One kind of kept up and one not. And then there's a couple more. As we leave here, we're going to find some more cemeteries. So kind of interesting. It shows you that probably we're a decent amount of populations, at least, whether in the town or just outside the town. But yeah, much more than expected here in Adams. We're out where they name the roads by numbers and letters. Just had an interesting stop at when I saw on the map, it said the Happy Cemetery, and it was actually the Happy Flats Cemetery. And when I pulled up, there was actually people there, and started talking to them, and their parents were buried there. And but one of the guys there had made the sign, had made the Happy Flats cemetery sign, and they were talking, looking at maybe needing to get it mowed. And it was interesting because they were talking about how so many young children and babies were buried there, and they thought it had to do with the Spanish flu. And some of them aren't, the dates aren't marked, but there's a lot from 19-teens, 1920s, and lots of just really young children buried there. We are making up for the lack of cemeteries in the first couple parts. At the Nabisco Cemetery, this actually had a post office for 3 years. 1904 to 1906. Oklahoma became a state in 1907. So kind of interesting. It's a nice cemetery. Very well mowed, and there's some really interesting, headstones to check out. So the tiny little community here of Baker, Oklahoma, has a really fascinating history. I'm sitting here right in front of the old school, and I'll tell you a little bit about that history in a minute. But Baker was a railroad town, but it became a double railroad town. So in 1931, the Beaver Mead and Inglewood Railroad, it was also known as the Katy Railroad, or the Katy train, came through. And just 3 years later, the Chicago, Rock Island, and Pacific Railway came through. So they had 2 railroads, in their first few years of existence. And actually, the town was called Bakersburg initially, and they had a post office from 1931 until 53. There was another town called Baker, and so they named it Bakersburg. In 1953, they changed it back to Baker. Maybe that original Baker, Oklahoma, became unincorporated or lost their post office or something like that. And so you can see the 2 elevators in town, and so obviously very busy place. Eventually in the 70s, both railroads closed down, and it was left to trucks to do the work that the railroads used to do. And so when you drive here and check out the school, they have a nice history on a stone in front of the school. It was started in 1908. They eventually had to rebuild in the 1930s, but some other places consolidated into here. Some of the cemeteries we've been visiting, that's how they got their names, because there was like a Pleasant Ridge, there's Nabisco, Happy Flats. So they all had schools, and they consolidated up here to Baker. And then eventually Baker closed down and consolidated. And I think the people in this area go to Turpin, Oklahoma now. So really interesting history in such a small community. There are a few older buildings in the town besides the elevators, and but mostly it's just a few people living in Baker and a lot of history. And now we've arrived to the second largest town in the Panhandle, Hooker, and take a little drive through the downtown and tell you about it. 1902, the Chicago Rock Island Railroad came through. 1927, the Beaver, Mead, and Inglewood Railroad came through. They named it after rancher John Hooker Threlkeld. And the Great Depression hurt it. In the Dust Bowl, obviously, population went down, but then in the mid-20th century, it profited from the gas field nearby. In 1954, there were 2 natural gas processing plants in the community that really helped the population. Definitely, they have fun with their name, Hooker, as obviously you can imagine some people might make a joke, and the town motto is, "It's a location, not a vocation." This is the small town of Tyrone, just up from Hooker. In 1888, the Chicago, Kansas, and Nebraska Railway completed a line down to Liberal, Kansas, and then they built a spur 7 miles to the southwest called Shades Well, as you see on that sign, inside the Oklahoma Panhandle. And the community of Tyrone was actually about 3 miles from here, and in 1892 it moved to this location, and the Tyrone-Shadewell community was a major shipping point for cattle herds from 5 different states. 1901, the Chicago, Rock Island, and Pacific Railroad extended their line here, and the new Tyrone community started to grow up. It was incorporated in 1915, and population has generally gone up since the early days. Certainly had the dip like all these other communities did during the Depression and Dust Bowl, and now the population has grown to 729. We've made it to the end of Texas County. We did 3 long videos exploring every bit of it that we could, and we have come to the end of the county, literally the end of the county. That is Kansas, right on the other side where that sign is. Right here, that's Texas County, where we've been exploring for the last several videos. And then right here, this is Beaver County. And that's the 3rd county in the Panhandle, and the only one that we haven't done a series of videos about. Eventually I'm gonna get there. I'm gonna do some videos about Beaver County, not right now, as I'm gonna kind of go back and start exploring some other places. But I'm stopping here because the first ghost town video of this area that I did of no man's land a few years ago, I stopped at a place and where there was nothing left and told a story and thought that it would be an appropriate place to end today. It was about Beer City, Oklahoma, one of the most notorious ghost towns probably in all of the United States. I think, in fact, I say that in the video. And it was located right around here. Liberal, Kansas is right back there. You can literally see it from here. And because this was no man's land, people could come across the border, and somewhere around this area there was a place called Beer City. So I'll let the couple years ago version of me tell that story right now. Imagine the type of businesses it was filled with. It was a bunch of bars and saloons and brothels, and just a place of ill repute because people could come and do anything they wanted with no repercussions. And to imagine something like that is pretty wild. There's a local legend story that there was someone trying to create some law enforcement in the town because it was such a rowdy place, and so he kind of named himself as the officer of Beer City, and they invited him. The townspeople invited him to one of the local saloons one night, and as soon as he walked in, they all opened fire and killed him all at once. And when somebody asked why were there so many people shot him, and the response was so that no one knew who actually was the person that murdered the sheriff of Beer City. So probably one of the most crazy ghost towns in all of the United States here, Beer City, right here. Now there is absolutely nothing left. It only lasted for 2 years, and it was probably gone very quickly as soon as this part of Oklahoma became Oklahoma territory, and then eventually the state of Oklahoma and laws would be enforced. There was no reason for the town to exist anymore. So definitely I guess you could say a historic place, wild times, the rowdiest of all outlaws, and the craziest of things probably happened right here in Beer City, Oklahoma. What a story, Beer City, appropriate place to end. It was near here, whether it was in Texas County or Beaver County, who knows? There probably are some people that know. I don't know, but it's right near this area. So being on the border makes sense, going from one county to the next. And like I said, eventually we'll get to Beaver County on down the road. I really enjoyed Texas County. There were a ton more post offices that we never found, and I'll put those on the screen, but there were a lot of them, and they lasted for a few years and then faded away, and it just shows you how difficult it was to start communities and towns in this harsh part of Oklahoma. So hopefully you enjoyed it. I know I did, and I appreciate you watching. Hey, you made it all the way to the end of the video. And now that you're here, let me tell you a little bit more about all the other things going on this channel. If you want to become a member, you can become a member on either Patreon or YouTube memberships. There's 3 different levels, and as you are on a different level, there's more and more things, behind the scenes videos, different things that you're going to be able to gain access to. Make sure you check out my website, travelwithawiseguy.com. There's a whole bunch of new stuff on there. There's a merchandise link with some new cool merchandise. There's a newsletter that you can sign up for. About every 3 weeks I send out a new newsletter that's free. I have Google Maps, which has documented every place that I've made a video about, and you can click on there and you can go to the map and you can find the videos that I made, and it's all in one very convenient place. There's lots and lots of other stuff on there, so make sure to check out the website and explore all around what I got going on. But once again, thank you so much for watching this video. And now on to the real reason that you're at the end of this video, the outtakes. Stare down. You're friendly. Hardesty, Oklahoma has 2 death go rounds at the school. Let's see which one is the best. Another one what you would burn your hand if it was a hot day. These ones that burn your hand would scald you, really spin well though. Okay, on to the next. It appears this one's identical. Dueling death go rounds. That's a first on the channel. I mean, you probably should take a point off for how hot it would be to get on that thing, but 10 out of 10 Hardesty because you have 2 and they spin like crazy. Hardesty thought they were cool with 2 death go rounds. Tyrone says, hold my beer. 1, 2, 3 death go rounds. Okay, this one's so wobbly, it won't even turn. Okay, I can see maybe why they have 3. And let's try number 2. Oh my goodness. Number 3 is wobbling. The wind is making it wobble, so I don't have too much optimism here. Oh, it's a little better. Okay, that one's pretty solid. 1 out of 3. The reason they have 3 probably, the other 2 don't work very well. So the video's not over. I thought about putting this in the regular part of the video, but I thought, you know what? People who make it all the way to the end of the video and watch the outtakes and are really the biggest fans maybe should get a little more of the story. I have a no man's land story I'm about to share, and it stems from the last time I was here when I was in Cimarron County.
If you had to picture the weekly meeting place for a group of anti-government religious zealots from the Oklahoma panhandle, what image would you have in your mind? Now I'd like for you to add the fact in that they allegedly planned a cold-blooded double murder there. If you came up with a scene from a Quentin Tarantino movie, you are getting close. NewsNation's Brian Enton saw the place for himself. He's live with me again. This was an area of this story I did not expect, Brian. I think giving it the title Clubhouse is a little generous. This is an abandoned school, and the vibes from your video, it's hard to describe them except for creepy, and I know there are a lot more adjectives I'm missing. So take me to this part of the story.
Yeah, honestly, it did feel like the scene from a horror movie. It doesn't feel anything like a clubhouse, and you're about to see. We kept hearing abandoned school over and over again, that's where the God's Misfits group met. Since it's an underground group, it's very hard to get information. But we finally tracked down where that school is. It's next to the Twombly's house, the suspect's house, by the way. I went out there, take a look. So this is where the Twombleys lived. This is where they lived when they were arrested. You can see the welcome sign right there in the front driveway. These are their dogs running out. But what's interesting is right next to their house is this old abandoned school right here in the middle of nowhere. I mean, it's totally surrounded by farmland. This is called the old Plainview School. Told that it closed a couple of decades ago. But what's interesting is we've heard from people in town that this is where the Gods Misfits meetings were held at times.
The sun has come out and I found a really cool old school, a Plainview School. And I was just down the road. There was a cemetery called Marcella because there was a post office for about 10 years in the early 1900s. And the school was just down the road. So I don't know much about it. And yes, I did not know much about this area. And basically there was murders that happened by the people that lived there next to the school. And unknowingly, I'm standing out there not too long after it happened. And their dogs are coming over and playing with me, and I'm just thinking it's a cool old school, and man, what a interesting place to visit. There is an ongoing court case with what's going on, so I'll put in the description, I'll put a link to the, kind of history of what happened there. It's pretty wild. I mean, it really does make you think, like, no man's land lives up to its reputation. And I just happen to be kind of innocent bystander, and here come the dogs. Yeah, I had no idea. So there you go. There's my own no man's land connection. Obviously brutal, horrific thing that happened. And I'm sitting in somewhere in the vicinity maybe of where those bodies were found, somewhere up here in northern Texas County. So very, very sad. And, for me to realized that after the fact, and I showed some friends the video and the whole story, it was kind of like we were just kind of like, wow, unbelievable. So yeah, I survived no man's land, both Cimarron County and Texas County. One more county to go. Hopefully we'll survive that one too.